What's up everybody, and welcome back to another video here on the ARCHI-TECH network. In this video I want to talk to you about a plugin that's really changed my own design process as well as that in the office and many other offices around the world, and that is the plugin of Rhino Inside Revit. So for those of you who've never heard of Rhino Inside Revit, well, it does exactly that. You can now, when you're in Revit, you can now open up an instance of Rhino and Grasshopper inside of the Revit environment and use it to open up a Rhino model, reference that geometry through Grasshopper, for example. Grasshopper now comes with a whole bunch of Revit specific components that allow you to create, to modify, to reference actual native Revit elements. So it's now giving us a bridge between Rhino and Revit. And like many firms around the world, we've always had this problem between this interoperability challenge between Rhino and Revit, right? Rhino is typically design space. That's where I usually design. You may or may not be using Grasshopper to do that as well. And documentation space is typically Revit. It's probably the most used BIM platform for documentation, and there's a whole host of plugins that have attempted to kind of solve this interoperability problem. So this has been a great tool for me because obviously I have that background in Rhino and Grasshopper on that computational side, but I'm using Revit on a day-to-day basis. So it's really helped me kind of blur the lines between the two. And also within the kind of design process itself, it's really blurred the lines between design and documentation. So you can be designing in Rhino and Grasshopper, but you can also be setting up your documentation side in Revit at the same time. And this kind of line between putting your pens down, now I need to go into production mode, can be a little bit blurred. You can kind of utilize each one for what it's good at. So like Rhino is obviously great for designing. It's very flexible and you can use Grasshopper to aid you in that process. Revit is great at documentation and automating drawings and setting up sheets and all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of use the two for what each one is good at to help speed up or expedite your own design process. So whilst we're designing, we can also be documenting. So in this video, I want to take you guys through 3 ways to bring geometry from Rhino into Revit, starting with just literally bringing in the Rhino model so you can reference the geometry itself, all the way to opening up a Rhino model, referencing the geometry, using Grasshopper to create actual native Revit elements. That way you guys will get a little bit of a flavor for how Rhino Inside works and possibly how you could incorporate it into your own design process and your own interoperability workflows from Rhino into Revit and utilize on your own projects. So let's go ahead, let's jump into Rhino, let's jump into Revit, then we'll jump into Rhino and we'll take a look. All right, so we're now live in Revit, and as you can see, I just have a kind of basic Revit project open. As you can see, I'm using Revit 2020. And yeah, so to go and get Rhino Inside installed, just head on over to rhino3d.com/inside/Revit/beta, or literally just Google Rhino Inside and this will come up. All you need to do is download the Rhino Inside Revit beta. It does require you to have Rhino 7. You can use that free for 90 days. And that's about it. This is also a great resource for getting started, and there's a whole bunch of guides and forums and things like that, and they're adding to this quite a lot. So beyond what we're going to do today, there's loads of really great stuff in here if you want to kind of continue to learn about Rhino Inside. So download that. Once you do have that downloaded and installed, then you will see a Rhino Inside tab like this in your Revit. I think Rhino Inside works on anything from 2016 or 2017 above. So as long as you have Revit 2016 or 17 upwards, you are good. So yeah, you can kind of see Rhino Inside is now loaded into my Revit session. To actually activate it, all you're going to do is come up here and hit the start button. It takes a couple seconds, and now kind of Rhino and Grasshopper behind the scenes is being loaded into your current session of Revit. So you need to do this every time you kind of come in the morning, open up, you have to fire up Rhino Inside, and then all of these kind of grayed out icons, as you can see here, come to life. So just bringing stuff in, I think it's kind of fairly self-explanatory what some of these are, but we'll explain it as we go. The first thing we're going to do is just really quickly bring in a model. Now, the model we'll be using is our kind of case study project. This is a Serpentine by Big, and as you can see, it's a quite a detailed model, I guess. In a way, it's comprised of three elements, right? The boxes themselves, the cross joints that actually join the boxes to one another, and then the brackets on the inside of the boxes that give the boxes rigidity. And this is the whole model. And I just tend to, whenever I'm working with Rhino to go into Revit, you just want to make sure your file's clean. The origin is going to be the same origin that you want in Revit. I would tend to kind of purge out anything. If you're using blocks, better to explode them for this particular instance, but otherwise you kind of want a clean model, right? That's always the goal anyway. But so this is the model that I have on the side. This is not open in Revit. This is just open normally. So I'm just to show you what that file is. All right, so the first way that we're going to bring the Rhino file in is to literally just import it in. And so if you hit this little button down by the Rhinoceros tab, you can see there's an import 3DM. So we're going to click that. And what this allows is we can just bring the model in. Sometimes it does this, like I have this, obviously I tested it before. I'm going to reselect it, and then you can see you get a little bit of a preview. You can choose whether it's positioning is going to be origin to origin or base point to base point. You can do the layers visible. The category is a generic model, and literally just give it a name. We're just going to hit, as you can see, I already tried this before, so we're just going to replace that one that I did previously. And this will just literally bring in the 3DM model. And so this is a very simple way to just bring in geometry to reference whatever it is. Maybe it's just a guide for, the geometry you're bringing in so that you can set up the file and get the origin and all that kind of stuff correct. The only downside, as you'll see when it comes in, is that it's not editable in any way. It's just an import. I can't select each individual element. I can't do anything with it. It's obviously not Revit geometry, but it is the first port of call for quickly bringing geometry into your file. So there you go. That took a little bit longer than I expected. I think that's because I ran a test before. So it's just kind of deleting and replacing. But as you can see, it comes, I select the whole thing. It's just named after the actual Rhino file. It's just one big thing, but one big element. But as you can see, it all comes in pretty clean. I can see all the detail and all that kind of stuff. It also does read materiality to a degree. Like if I had made, if you have windows, for example, in your building or glass as a material, it does actually read the transparency and brings that across, which is quite a nice little touch for these kind of quick exercises. So that's option number one, just to literally bring in your geometry. It also comes in pinned, or no, in fact, it hasn't come in pinned. But what we'll do is we'll just move this a little bit to the side, so we have one of our examples. So yeah, first port of call, super quick and super easy to bring in. Okay, so the next step is we're going to actually use Rhino and Grasshopper to create, to import this geometry element by element. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here and actually do the magic moment of opening up Rhino and Grasshopper inside Revit. So as you can kind of guess, you hit the Rhino button here and Rhino will open up. As you can see, it's pretty much the exact same Rhino that you're used to.
And to open up Grasshopper, you can either hit the button in the background there, or as you would do, you just type in Grasshopper, or however you usually kind of fire up Grasshopper. So as you can see, this is just normal Rhino and Grasshopper. For those of you who are familiar and have a keen eye, you may notice that there's a whole bunch of new components, or sorry, new components here. These Revit primitives, and so this is the unique part to Rhino Inside. This is the unique part to Rhino Inside. You'll see there's a whole bunch of primitives, can't speak today, that allow you to actually select and interact with Revit stuff. So graphical element is literally just like selecting Revit stuff, levels, grids. You can even select geometry of pieces of Revit elements. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here. I won't go through them, but just so you guys know where these things are. And also you'll notice that there is a Revit ribbon at the top here. And this is where all the magic happens. This is where all the really cool components live. Again, I won't go through them all, but you can kind of get a glimpse. Like, this is where you can actually build a Revit floor or a wall, or add a family. Direct shapes is what we'll be using in a second. Creating elements, families, materials, walls, and all that kind of stuff. So that's where all this stuff lives, and it's these components that allow us to interact with Revit and create Revit stuff, and that's the beauty of Rhino Inside. So what we're going to do for our second example of how to bring stuff in is we're going to be using the direct shape. I'll explain this in a little bit, but what I want to do is, of course, come here and open up my file. Alright, so we have the serpentine now, the model now open in Rhino. So now we're going to use Grasshopper to reference some of this geometry and create it over in Revit. And so the way I'm going to do that, and the other thing you'll notice is that all your plugins that you use that are compatible are also still available here on the Grasshopper in Rhino Inside. So one of my favorite kind of plugins is Elephant, so I'm going to use the reference by layer. And so this is just a nice way to kind of bring geometry in. I'm also going to turn off the preview both in here and also in Revit, because it does take up a little bit of memory. So here we go. So we've got a couple layers in our file. As you can see here, it's always a little bit difficult to record with all these things going on. And also let's whack bifocals on there so you can see what's going on. So we have boxes, box brackets, and the brackets themselves. So cool thing about this component is if you use the value list, just plug it into the layers, it will find all the layers in your Rhino file, and you can just select them by the drop down menu. So let's start with the boxes, and as you can see, these are all the boxes ready to go. So the component we're going to use is, if we go to the Revit toolbar, is the direct shape. And this is basically what I use. If I go through these components like a floor, let's say this box thing doesn't really fit into your typical Revit components. They're not really floors and walls and stuff like that. So this is kind of where direct shape comes into play. And it's a great way to just bring geometry into Rhino, into Revit. Always get confused saying Rhino and Revit when teaching Rhino Inside. But it allows you to bring geometry in, but we can control it to a certain degree, which is nice. So for example, it's we can bring the geometry in. The input here is the geometry input, and there, but we can also give it a material. We can assign a category to it. We can add a name. So you can control it a little bit. So if you go straight away and plug in the geometry, it will start to create that geometry in Revit as we speak. Now, and the components in Rhino Inside, they go black when they have executed their function, you can, again, if you go back to that website and the wiki there, you'll see what all these things mean. But if we go over to Revit, there we go. We've now got the serpentine in. As you can see, this is one big object, and that's simply because the list is flattened here. So if I graft it, not graph parallel, just a regular old graft. I could do the shortcut, but just to be explicit, let's use graft. It will create them in individual objects. The other point I was trying to get across is that the idea of baking when you're using Rhino Inside is not necessarily there. Once it has the information to create the thing that it needs, it just goes ahead and creates it. And that's just because of how the Revit API is. So there you go. We have our boxes in here. Now you can see that they're like, individually selectable, and now we can start to add a bit more detail to controlling them. So for example, the name you can use, I honestly don't really use the name too much. The next thing, which is kind of important, is a category. So we can assign it a Revit category. By default, these things will come in as a generic model. In this case, that actually is probably what I go for. But let's say we could argue that these boxes are like structural framing, let's say. I mean, just to pick something else. If we plug that in, then these boxes will now be a structural framing category. And then when you use your view settings or something in Revit that overrides, for example, structural framing, they will still react with it. So that's a nice way that you can bring in geometry and they still kind of act Revity. You can turn them off, you can override them and stuff like that. So that's a good little thing that we can control. All right, there we go. One thing I would maybe advise is, as you're doing this, just put the Grasshopper solver on lock. So if you don't know what that is, hit the middle mouse button and just hit the disable solver. It just means that as you do this, it won't kind of rerun the script. The last thing we can add is the material, and this is quite a good one. If you just type in material, we'll do, just be careful, this is the Grasshopper material. We'll do add material here, and we're just going to do that by calling this box, okay? Oops, forgot to put in the speech marks. Right, and this is just it's gonna create a material in Revit that will be assigned to this geometry. And again, that's just a nice way that I can control graphically how these look. I can make them slightly gray or apply a material to them through Revit, allowing us to get into our more typical Revit workflows. So there you go. The geometry is now created. I'm gonna put the solver on again. Let's come back to Revit. And now we'll see, the boxes are individually selectable. As I said, they are a structural framing category. If we go to manage materials, we should see, if we search at the top here, there you go, sub box, and I can go and change the color and make them some kind of funky color. So that's it. That's basically the gist of the script. Now that we have this little snippet kind of set up, now we have this snippet set up. All I'm going to do is copy and paste this guy. Now do the brackets. I'm going to call this bracket, and then again we'll do the box bracket separately. And I could do this a little more intelligently using data trees, but just to, it's a simple, quick way. Let's run this. This might take a few seconds because it's now generating quite a few of those little brackets. But yeah, this is option 2 for bringing that geometry in quickly. It's not real Revit geometry, but it's a nice half and half kind of situation. You've got the geometry in, but there's still a little bit of control on the Revit side through the category, through the material, visually, and through view templates and stuff like that. So this is our kind of second option for quickly bringing stuff in. And this one is really great for when you're starting a project and you just want to get that geometry in. Okay, there we go. You can see all the components have run in the background. And then as we zoom in, we've got all the brackets, all the detail in there. And we can start making drawings and stuff like that. So there you go. That's our option 2 for how to quickly bring stuff in using our direct shape components. Okay, so for the third approach to bringing stuff in, it requires a little bit more preparation and a bit of both sides of the coin being both BIM and computation. So this way we're going to use Rhino and Grasshopper to reference that geometry again, but we're going to try and create some actual Revit families. But in order to do that, I've had to pre-make the families themselves. So you can see here I've created 3 really quick families. One being the box itself, the actual box. And as you can see, what I've done is, because the brackets are intrinsically connected to the box itself, the length of the box, each L bracket family is actually embedded in the box family itself. And I also had to make this in a particular way where the center, basically it works like a domain box. It requires the center of the box itself. So if we made a bounding box around this box, created its centroid, that's basically how this works. And if you were going to create it in Revit from scratch, that's probably not how you would create it. But because I kind of knew how I was going to do it through Grasshopper, I kind of tailored this so it would kind of work. And all I have is, like, the great thing about this is I can go in, I can change the dimensions of the box throughout the project, but of course each individual box requires an instance parameter for its length. So that's how that works. And the same thing goes for the cross bracket, which is actually connecting them. You'll see it's centered on itself, which again is kind of slightly odd if you were to do it, to manually build it in Revit. But because I was kind of, I spent time thinking about how I would do this, therefore that's how I made the boxes. So I made 2 Revit families. They're in there. And now I'm just using Grasshopper to reference that geometry from Rhino and build it in Revit with these native Revit families. So let's go and have a look at that. So we've got our serpentine model, which of course we're referencing. And we're going to go through the same kind of process again. So let's also, I restarted a new session of Revit because having the model in the background was just slowing things down a little bit. So I'm going to use the reference by layer, the elephant component. Of course, you don't have to use this. You can just, if you just select a layer and grab the brep component and right click on it, it does the exact same thing. This is, for me, is just like a force of habit from using it a fair bit in the past. In fact, I should have turned off my view properties there because this will burn a little bit of time. I'll fast forward this in the video though. Oh, there we go. But that is a good tip in Grasshopper in general, is don't use the solid preview, and also specifically here, just I would turn off the preview in your Revit workspace. We don't really need to see this, to be honest, but let's keep it over there. Maybe that looks a little bit better. All right, so we have our boxes. Maybe I'll just put the wireframe on so you guys can see what's going on. There you go, which is also nice because you can see a preview of where it actually is. All right, so we have our boxes. What I'm going to do is I'm grabbing the boxes. I'm going to create a bounding box around each one. Now, I probably thinking ahead, I think we can graph the list so we're kind of working on a box by box basis, so we're not clumping all the boxes together or anything like that. You see the preview is actually kind of slowing things down a little bit. Let me turn this off and we'll crack on here. So I'm basically getting a bounding box. Let's bring Revit Rhino back so you can maybe see in this preview if we hide this guy. All right, so you can see we're creating a bounding box. Oh, it would help if I actually had the boxes. There we go. So you can see I start off with the boxes. I'm just grafting list, and then I'm going to get the bounding box for that. The reason why I want to do that is I'm going to do a area calculation, and of course the useful thing is I could actually use the area for whatever reason, but the area component gives you the centroid as one of its outputs, which is kind of handy. So it's going to give me the center of the box, and that's going to be the location for my creating my Revit family. The other thing I need is basically the length of the box. So that will place the box there, but now I need to know how the length of each of our boxes. So what I'm going to use for that is, what shall we use? The deconstruct box, I think, should work. So we can grab this box. And also, because the way that I know this file is set up, all the boxes are facing, as you can see, in the x-axis. So I can grab the x-axis parameter, which kind of gives you the domain of the box, or like its location within the project. We can use, what is it, domain, deconstruct domain. This guy, deconstruct, no, wrong one. There we go, deconstruct domain. And this will give us the start of our domain and the end of our domain. If we minus one from the other, that is going to give us, it should be the length of our box. We'll find out if it works later on. And then we probably want to turn that into an absolute. So that should be the length of our box. Of course, we could do something as a quick check, like make a line of that length. But in this case, let's just run it. Let's live the dream. Let's live on the edge and just run it. All right, so I think we have, because I know the family, I kind of know what we need. And as you would do, like with whatever you're going to be creating, you're going to have to create the family beforehand, so you kind of know roughly what's kind of coming. So the tricky thing with Rhino Inside at the moment is we only have so many components. We don't have, for example, this that particular family in Revit. I would probably create that as a line-based family. That would make a lot of sense, right? I could draw a line, and the box would basically kind of be extruded along that line in theory. But Rhino Inside doesn't have a family or like an add component by line component. So it only has a location one, which is why I went for that. It's a generic model family that's point-based or plane-based or location-based. And it's just through that I can use this component to actually place that family. So the add component is basically add family, in other words. It requires a few things: a location, which is just going to be the plane, the type, the family type that you are going to be placing, the level, and the host. And again, because this particular family, right now I haven't established my levels. We will do that a little bit later on. The good thing is that it does just connect to whatever the closest level is, and there is no host, so I don't need to worry about a host. So the main thing I need is the type. So you can just type in type, and you can go and find your family that you've created. So mine is a model category. It's a generic model, and it is the sup box, right? So that is my type. And then my location is going to be the centroid of my boxes. Now, the component has already got enough information to go and place all the boxes. So we'll see this kind of in-between stage where we'll see the boxes, but they should all be the same length. All right, so you can see, there you go, there's got the Rhino previews coming in, but if we go into Revit, there we go. We have all the boxes in there, but you can see they, like I said, they are all the same size. We're seeing a very thick, a thick serpentine right there. So we're halfway through creating it, and this was a bit quicker because now you're creating, native Revit stuff. So it's a bit more native, bit more Revit friendly. So it's not as kind of computationally heavy. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to get in and change that length parameter. And we can't do that at the moment. We first need to create the object. And then the component we're going to use is set elements parameter. So this allows us after the fact to set a parameter within that family. So the element that we want to change the parameter is the boxes that are coming out of that component. Even though they've been created in Revit, they're still within our canvas. Like they still come out the other side of that component, and we can still access them all. The key that I want to change, if you remember from the family, is called, if I spell it correctly, length. And if my maths is correct, this should be the length of each box. So as I go, now that should run and change that parameter, and we'll see if my assumed maths is correct. All right, so that one actually took a fair bit of time because it's altering quite a lot of geometry. So I fast forward the video a little bit, but as you can see now, everything, the maths was correct, luckily. And as you can see, the boxes are all in place. Because of how I set up the family, I can also now select the individual brackets as well as the boxes. And there we go. We now have a real Revit geometry, a real pavilion made out of Revit geometry. Of course, we're not quite finished. We still got, this is the boxes, but we can do the same thing. Once again, we can copy this snippet down. And again, this was me thinking ahead a little bit about how I actually set up these families and this process a little bit. So, it's for each project, you need to, there is a sketching phase of thinking about how to make the family and how's it going to be created with Grasshopper, with the components you have available with Rhino Inside. One thing I forgot is we've changed, so we're now referencing the brackets, but we also need to change the family that we're placing. I almost forgot that. So yeah, if we go back to this, we want to choose the X bracket because that's the bracket that's in between each box. So yeah, we can copy this same snippet down, but we're changing what we're inputting is the brackets, and what we're outputting being the L shape. It still has the same length parameter. I made the same parameter for that family as well. So let's go ahead and run this. This might take a little bit of time, but I'll fast forward this, but let's give it a whirl. All right, so we're done. That's run. That one didn't take quite as long. I'm just going to lock this in case. But if we zoom in, we can now see our brackets are in place. So yeah, these don't take as long because obviously this guy is technically kind of placing 5 families. This is just one quite simple one. And there we go. So this is how we can use Grasshopper to create Revit components. And of course, the beauty of this is, throughout the project, let's say the thickness of the box goes from 10 to 20 millimeters or something like that, I can still control this, and so I still have a level of control, and I can add detail as well. So maybe I want to, I work out that there's a screw and a nut and bolt that goes in a certain distance. I can go and add that in. So this is the best way to bring stuff in if you want to continue working in Revit. So yeah, to sum up a little bit, those are the three ways that I bring, or the sequence of ways that I bring stuff from Rhino into Revit. So initially you can just use that import process to bring the geometry in. If not, then you can use the direct shape as a quick kind of half and half scheme. Otherwise, you can use the components in Grasshopper to actually create native Revit elements, like in this case. Now, if we were doing a more regular building, it might be a bit easier to create floors, columns, and walls and things like that. In this case, we needed to make a family that's a bit more unique to the boxes. But yeah, hope this gave you guys a good little introduction to 3 ways that I have been using to bring geometry in. And reach out if you guys have any questions, and we'll see you on the next video.
Alright, so now you guys have a little bit of an introduction to Rhino Inside, and you know the basics of bringing geometry from Rhino into Revit. Hopefully this is something you can take and implement on whatever project it is you're working on right now. Do reach out to us, and if you have any questions, or if you have any examples of how you've actually used what you learned in this video on a project, we'd love to see it. If you have found this video useful, help us out by hitting that stupid little button there. Hit us the like or subscribe. Like I say, this just helps us grow the channel and continue to bring videos like this to you guys in the future. As I mentioned, we are working on long format courses. We will be doing a course on Rhino Inside to get into all the other cool stuff that you can do with Rhino Inside. So stay tuned for that, which will hopefully be coming later this year. Otherwise, keep in contact on the Instagram page. That's where we're always posting what's upcoming on the ARCHI-TECH network. Otherwise, thank you for joining, and we'll see you on the next video.